What's up, everyone? Welcome back to part two of the interview with Christopher Moore. I'm not going to waste any time here. Let's get kicking with the second episode. I'm not really sure. Do people say that? Let's get kicking with something? I don't know. Anyway, let's do it. In an attempt to find out what affects Chris on a day-to-day basis, I asked him what pisses him off in life, and conversely, what brings him joy.
Wow. Probably the pissing off thing is I'm really trying to stay out of current events that way, but I have been a mess since the election.
Totally understandable. And I think a lot of us can relate.
And I quite honestly haven't got much done because I don't do good work when I'm just furious, and I've been sort of furious about that. So on a real practical right now basis, that can sort of the outrageous hypocrisy of people in power really pisses me off. And that, I don't know if that has anything to do with me as an artist. It just has to do with me in the world and having enough time to, and freedom to be able to know what's going on. In my personal life, people that just don't hit their mark, people that say I'm going to do this by this time, or this is going to be this, I'm going to turn this in at this point, or I'm going to deliver this at that point, and then they don't do it. It really infuriates me. Really will send me over the top. Yeah, and I am definitely not a type A personality as far as, I don't, I'm certainly not OCD, and I live in chaos, physically, but it's just that I hit my marks, and it's not easy. It's constantly, oh my God, I've got a deadline that just is blinking on the calendar, like a neon sign outside of my window, 24/7. This is the deadline, and it's always out there, and I always have to hit it, and I usually hit it. And if I don't hit it, I call and say, look, can I have 2 extra weeks, or can I have 3 extra weeks, or if I send this in, can you get to it right now? And often the editor will say, well, no, I even if you send it tomorrow, I can't get to it for 3 weeks. And I'm like, fine, I'm going to work on it for 3 more weeks. And so when I hit those marks, or if I say I'm going to be somewhere, I'm there. And so when somebody doesn't do that, I'm infuriated. It's disrespectful. I don't really, I can't rationalize. It's just anger. I mean, if I really had a handle on it, I wouldn't be angry. I'd just be understanding about it, but that pisses me off. Other than that, and just sort of what you would think: injustice, intolerance, those things that are going to be outrageous to any human being.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So on the flip side, then, what brings you the most joy in life?
Probably, and again, quite honestly, on a basis of looking over, a lifetime, is when I really nail like a paragraph or a scene. Honestly, there's something that I go, okay, that's just sweet. There's just a feeling about it. I remember I was writing Practical Demon Keeping, my first book, and I used to write in a diner at the counter because I didn't have room in the place I was living for a desk. So I would get up every morning and get dressed and drive to this diner and sit and drink coffee and write by, longhand. I didn't have a laptop at that point. I wrote a scene one time. I had a friend who was working at a small newspaper in town, and it was one of my roommates. And I wrote and he was also a writer, obviously. And I wrote this scene. It was maybe a page and a half. And I just went, oh, this is the best thing I've ever written. And I got in the car and drove down and ran up, and he was in the dark room because he was their photographer too. And I'm like, dude, I got to read this to you. And he's going, wait, I can't open the door for another 2 minutes. and I just stood there. I remember just standing there and outside of the dark room reading this scene to him because I was just so ecstatic about it. And 30 years ago, and I still remember that moment. So those are the greatest moments, is just when you get it right. And it's very visceral, and it's not self-aggrandizing.
Right.
It's just answering your question, what's the most satisfying? Brings you joy? It's just not that this is going to be in the world and make me famous. It's the man, I pulled this off.
Right. And do you remember that particular scene?
Yeah, it's and it's in retrospect, it's not like, it doesn't enlighten the human condition that well, but it's just a scene about this woman, Mavis Sand, who is a bartender, and she over the years has had so many. Basically, the scene is maybe 3 paragraphs, and it talks about, over the years, each of these parts of her body that has been taken, by death. Like, she has a pig heart valve, and she has artificial knees and artificial hips, and all this stuff has gradually been gone. And the scene sort of ends with saying, so when her time finally came, death would be like slipping into a warm bath, and that, because she had lived so long with it. And I don't remember obviously the exact wording, but that was the scene that I went, oh yeah. Oh yeah. I would high five myself if it wasn't embarrassing. And so yeah, it's probably that. And then, the things that give anybody joy. I don't have kids. So I suppose that's what most people would answer. But it's that my work is really where I derive most of my despair and joy, both. So
Yeah, right.
got that going.
Sure. And, whenever I'm reading your books, I always think, wow, is there anything that happened in Chris's life that kind of inspired some of the crazy stuff that he writes about? So is there anything in your life that has happened that's kind of crazy and that you can pinpoint that has led to some of the writing?
I don't think there's been, I mean, there have been a couple of scenes, literally just scenes, that came out of dreams, where you just sort of have that unconscious combining of images that you would never put together in a logical manner. So there's that as far as the supernatural stuff, but much of it is just working within a context of rules that were set up. We all, I think, are reading things like Peter Pan when we're little, and shit about talking bears, and all that kind of stuff. Everything you read about when you're little, a mouse and a motorcycle, is supernatural. So I think what I do in my work as far as story goes is just extrapolation of that. It's not, again, looking for anything autobiographical isn't going to be it. I mean, there are certainly research opportunities where I have an experience, because I put myself there, that I can work into a book. Island of the Sequin Love Note, I went out to the outer islands of Yap and lived on this island where the highest level of technology was a thermos. And a lot of the little moments that I had, I worked into scenes in that book, and the characters are people that I met there. Obviously, made to do things that they didn't do in real life, but the characters are definitely based on real people.
Yeah, like the shark guys, right?
Yeah, that all those people are all those characters are based on people I met.
Oh, wow. So you actually had, what was it called? Tuba?
Yeah.
I
yeah.
think.
Every
Yeah.
night.
And
Had to. Yeah.
Every night.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Betel Nut too, right?
Yeah.
How is that, by the way? I've never tried
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's just, it's like eating sand.
Oh, well, all right.
Yeah, it's because you put powdered lime on it, which is what gives it its sting, I guess. And it has very little flavor, and it has this this kind of burn to it because of the powdered lime, which makes a chemical reaction. But the powdered lime is sandy. It's burnt coral is where they get it. And so it for one, wears your teeth away. If you do a lot of betel nut, it turns your teeth black. A lot of the people of the Micronesian islands or any place that use betel nut, their teeth are black. But you do it. And the high is like smoking, it's not, cup of coffee high. It's not, it's the kind of thing that you can do habitually because you're not gacked on it by any stretch of the imagination. It's certainly a drug that you could, I suppose chewing caffeinated gum all day would be about the same, or nicotine gum would be about the same equivalent of it. So there's no high to it. And it, like any bad habit, you'd have to make yourself do it because it's unpleasant, from the get go. Uh, and Tuba is just horrible. It's like drinking alcoholic dishwater. Um, but the guys wouldn't talk to me if I didn't go to the men's drinking circle, and I needed them to talk to me to have a book. So even though I had been sober at that point, like 7 or 8 years, I went to the men's drinking circle every night and passed around the little coconut shell full of Tuba.
Yeah, and do you know how they're doing right now? I don't know if there's some way that you can keep in touch with them.
Well, there's no internet. I got a note from an email from the chief's daughter about who I stayed with probably 5 or 6 years ago, and she was on, God, it's a more Palau, which is a much more technologically advanced island. They do have internet and stuff. And she sent me an email saying everybody was okay. But I mean, it's been so long. That was like 95. I think I was in Yap. So, and I've moved, it's far. It's not on the way to anywhere. And you move on. I mean, at some point that may be my character flaws, that I don't keep those relationships with people. I haven't seen any of the people. I lived on Crow Reservation for Coyote Blue, and I haven't seen any of those people since. Um, the people that I met when I did Fluke, I've kept in touch with, and in fact spent Christmases with the guy who was the photographer character in there. I mean, we're very good friends, but it's just, when you write about a bunch of different stuff and you go to different corners of the world, you don't. It's tough to maintain friendships when, again, you spend most of your life locked in a room by yourself, uh, making clicking noises. And there are people that probably do it, but I clearly don't have that ability.
That's really cool though that you're actually able to go out and live it to develop the story. I don't really know how many other authors do things like that.
I don't know either. I just thought that it was, I early on, I realized that, if everything comes from your imagination or some academic research, you're never going to be out in the world and have a life. So if I was ever going to have any sort of adventures, I had to make that part of my work. And those things have sort of calmed down from going and living on an island somewhere, to hanging out in Paris for 2 months. But it always brings something to the book. My wife said that to me when I was going to write Lamb, and as there always is, there was political unrest in Israel at the time. And I said, I don't need to go. I'm writing about people that have been dead for 2,000 years. There's not going to be anything that I get. And she said, go. You always get something that you never could have anticipated. And so I went and I spent like 3 weeks in Israel. I took like the Footsteps of Jesus tour. I went into a travel agent, which was a thing that there still were then. And I said, look, I want the footsteps of Jesus. I want to get in, get out, nobody gets hurt. And so he sent me on a tour of Israel. It was like 3 weeks, and you got to see Sea of Galilee and the Mount of Olives and all the different places in historical and religious places to all the different faiths in Israel and Palestine. And it added an enormous dimension to the story that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone. Just going to the Dead Sea, where essentially Jericho is in Judea. That's something that you can't even imagine until you've been there. I couldn't have imagined a place as desolate as that place is. And so when I have a scene from the Bible when which is 2 lines in the Bible, I think, when Jesus heals the 2 blind men in Jericho, the first thing they say in Lamb is so this is it? And he's like, yeah, you can see, behold. And they're like, yeah, I really thought there would be more color. And they start asking, well, what color is that? And he goes, well, that's brown. And they go, well, how about that? And he goes, well, that would also be brown. Because man, when you're in Judea, or what was Judea, that's the only color you're going to see. It's various shades of brown and tan. There's nothing green or any other color there. So that it does add dimension. And for virtually everything, a lot of the books are set in places where I live, so I don't have to do that. I think 4 of my books or 5 of my books or 6 of my books are set in San Francisco, where I live. 3 of them were set in Pine Cove, which used to be where I lived. One set in Hawaii, where I went first and then went and lived for a few years afterwards.
And it definitely comes out in the books that you really know the places that you're writing about. Now, do you have any advice for any aspiring writers out there who are wondering maybe a couple things? One, how do I actually go to a physical location to do research for a book? And two, when I'm not out there, but I'm instead, inside making clicking noises on my computer alone in a room, how do I deal with cabin fever?
Well, the first thing is there was no instruction book on how to go do research, and I really sort of went to the wrong places in some cases, and then just made the story from what I did see. Like I went to Micronesia for Island of the Sequin Love Nun because I was going to write about cargo cults, which was something I encountered in Anthropology 101 in college. And it was interesting. And a lot of my books are all based on what's cool. Like if you go through and take a whole 100 level ethnography course, one of the things that'll stand out is cargo cults are cool, So that was sort of, and that's my approach to research too, is you go look at stuff and you don't write everything down. You don't get into this pointillistic detail about things that don't matter. You go, well, what's cool? What was cool here? What did I see here that I can make fun of, or I can sort of illuminate, or I can just, people will go, well, that's interesting. And, what's vivid, I guess, is a better way to describe it. And I didn't know how to do that. I just would throw myself into, I just went to truck because there were 61 Japanese warships that were sunk in the lagoon, and I wanted to scuba dive them, and I just sort of walked around asking people. I was just as pathetic. Coyote Blue. I just was going to write a book about the Native American trickster god Coyote, and I was like, well, they have Indians in Montana. I'll go to Montana. I know a person in Montana. So I went to Montana and started asking around. I just remember I picked up a hitchhiker and driving from Seattle across Spokane into Idaho and into Montana. And this guy was obviously Native American. I picked him up right outside of Seattle, and we were driving all the way across the state to Spokane. And this poor guy I grilled him. It was like, and it was like I would have much rather have had somebody try and murder me than talk to this guy. Because I was like, so what's it like to be an Indian? Have you always been an Indian? What's it like when you get up in the morning? What's an Indian breakfast like? I mean, not quite that blunt. I was trying to, but I was in this ridiculous sports car I bought with my first advance on my first book, my zing thing, and this poor guy is hitchhiking across across Washington State, and he's got to listen to my stupid shit. So it was just, I'm sure he tells the story as his version is a horror story. So my answer is, what would my advice be is, try not to get killed.
I love it. I'm writing that one down. Yeah.
Yeah. Try not to get killed. And if you can read ahead of where you're going, that's probably a good idea. I didn't always do that. But some of the more extreme research things that I did, there really wasn't a discernible internet when I did them. There was like email, and in the early 90s up to the mid 90s, and so there wasn't the ability to just click on, I wonder what it's like in Billings, Montana. You just couldn't do that. And so you get as many books as you can, but because my whole reason for going was to have, what's it like vividly, viscerally, in person. Reading it was not, other than just, making sure I don't get lost, was not going to be the best thing. And the best thing to do was, and that's also difficult for me because I tend to be shy about approaching people. And certainly early in my career, I didn't feel like I could tell anybody I was a writer. I mean, I thought I was faking until I had like 4 books. And yeah, I'd read this quote by Saul Bellow, probably before I'd written a book. And he said, of those writers who publish a first book, 99% of them will never write a second. And of those who write a second, 99% of those will never write a third. And so having read that, I was like, well, I can't, until I publish at least 3 books, I can't really, I don't know if I've even made it. I'll just tell people I'm a waiter and I write a little bit, you know. And I, so when in doing research, I didn't have credentials. Now, as time went on, I would be like, hey, here's a pile of my books. And then you all of a sudden, people are like, oh, okay. And that's certainly what I did when I did my whale book, is I just sort of sent a pile of books to the scientists and they went, yeah, sure, come on over, hang out with us. But that's not something that you can say. Yeah, as a new writer, the best thing you should do is have, 5 of your books to show to people so they know that you're legit. But that's sort of my strategy now. But it doesn't help with just, like real people in the world. They don't care, And also, I don't interview real people in the world. Like when we were in France, I had evolved in my methods, and I didn't just go up to people and go, so what's it like to be French? Have you always been French? Did you always want to be French? What's a French breakfast like? Yeah. So,
right.
But basically, don't get killed. Try and do a little planning and think about your story the whole time that you're doing it. Because your story can. It kind of needs to remain fluid. The more fluid that it can, rather than have this hard. I mean, I always have an idea of what I want to do before I do the research. But you can't make it too hard an outline, because then you close the door to a lot of cool stuff.
Gotcha. And when you're at home, just clicking away on your own, how do you deal with the solitude? Or does it even bother you that much?
I think I'm better than a lot of people I know, including writers I know. I'm okay with it. I mean, obviously anybody who becomes successful as a novelist has come to terms with it. But there are some people, I mean, Douglas Adams famously hated the solitary nature of writing. And that's why he went off and made video games and other stuff in the last few years of his career. For me, everything is fighting to get discipline. Always has been. I try to write every day, and man, I miss that a lot. I'm worse now than I was when I started. But I try to write every day. I try to at least get in front of the manuscript every single day when I'm working on a book. And, I do set goals, but I often don't hit them. And sometimes I exceed them, but more often I don't hit them. I'll try to say, do 1,000 words a day. And, if I was really doing 1,000 words a day, I'd be finishing a book every 3 months. And that's just not what I'm doing. I'm writing a book every 18 months on average. But, it's just, everything for me, has to be going back to, how do I get my work done? And I have to learn to say no to people. I really have to learn to say no to people. And that's something that's not easy. It's like, your friends from New York are coming into town. Can you have lunch? Well, if I do, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to miss working that day, because I'm going to get up and I'm going to, oh, well, it's 9. As soon as I get started, I'm going to have to leave. Whereas I would probably get all the work done in the world I was going to do in those 3 hours. But mentally, I know I'm useless and I'm going to not do anything because I'm going to go have lunch with someone. The same token, if I have a dentist appointment at 2, it's like, why even bother starting to work at 7 in the morning? That's just my own weakness. So everything for me is about going, I can't, people are like, we're coming out in June. Can you hang out with us? And it's like, no. And that's just me, because I tend to live in tourist towns. I lived in Hawaii for 3 years, and everybody I knew came and visited. I live in San Francisco now, so every time someone comes to San Francisco, and it's great. I much rather hang out with friends than write, but I can't. And so my dealing with it is very much a day-to-day thing. Very much you try to. The same way that, you can't, I don't think it's healthy to stare down the barrel of a 400-page novel. You deal with a novel scene by scene, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter. And that's how you get it done. And it's the same token with the time frame to write a book. You can't look at, okay, it's 12 months and I'm not going to have any social contact with anybody. You have to live with it day by day and within your tolerances. And so if you really need to have some human contact, you go, okay, as soon as I finish this chapter, I'm going to, call some friends, and work within that. I think my method might be different than other people's. I write slowly. I'm not as productive on a day by day basis as a lot of writers are. So, guys that are writing books in 3 months, I take typically 18. Um, so there's a lot of more goofing off time and a lot more sort of dragging myself back to the page. I'm not a master of it. I just do it well enough to get a book done every 18 months. And my stuff is funny, so it's harder to be disciplined about that because I can sit down and write, for 8 hours a day and maybe crank 20 pages or something. But if it's not funny, I have to do it again tomorrow. Whereas if you're just trying to do plot points, it's a little bit easier to do for one, you can outline more because you don't have to follow comic impulses and so forth. But I think your question was, what's the secret to managing your time and dealing with the loneliness? And the secret is, you just do it as long as you can. And then, you go, look, I'm going a little bit loopy. And the people in your life need to understand too. And that's not going to be an easy thing to get. It's one of the hardest things is to get everyone else to understand that this is your work and it needs to be treated as if you were showing up to, see patients or, build houses or whatever else somebody else's work is. It almost feels embarrassing sometimes to say to someone, I have to work, because they're like, well, why can't you just go out to lunch? Nobody cares whether you finish this or not. And that's especially
really,
well, yeah, that's especially the case when you're starting out, because how pretentious is it? I'm writing a novel. I can't have lunch with you because I'm writing a novel.
It's going to be the best one ever.
Yeah. I need to illuminate the human condition and the human heart in conflict with itself.
Exactly.
I can't have lunch with you. So yeah, again, it goes back to that balance thing. And I think everybody finds their own way, but you always have to end up back at the page because it's not going to get done otherwise. So whatever it takes to get your ass in front of the page, that's what you got to do. And without distractions. I mean, Christ, the internet is one of the worst things to happen to a writer. To be 2 clicks away from everyone
and anything
it's murderous to productivity. I mean, it's great if you're like, I wonder if this tree grows at that altitude or some stupid detail nobody cares about, to be able to know that instantly. But it's just murderous for productivity. If I were strong enough, I'd say what you want to do is hardwire, unplug from the internet when you write. But I've never been strong enough to do that. So, I was up north I have a writing hovel up north in Sonoma County, and the fires knocked the internet out last week when I was up there working, and I panicked. I mean, I had plenty of food, water, and I was 30 miles away from the nearest fire, and I was supposed to be working, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what if they're saying something on Twitter that's a thing?
Seriously?
I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like, oh, what are you? It's like someone interrupting your drug source. It was really sad. Yeah, I called my wife and go, I'm coming home. She's like, why? And I was like, to escape the fires. And that wasn't it. It was like, I've got to say something snarky on Twitter or I will explode.
Exactly. Yeah. And wow, speaking of, it is kind of difficult focusing on a lot of different things, even like for the work that I do, the things that I do. And I, as a digression, I can totally relate with saying, well, I don't have time. I have to do this podcast. I have to interview this person or something, same type of thing. But also going back to what we spoke of much earlier, it's been difficult focusing on just about anything sometimes when you're like, wow, the world is, I guess entropy is real. And I guess, all this, how can it get any worse? And then the next day, oh, it just did. It just got a lot worse. Yeah. So,
yeah. I don't know how I don't have any advice because I'm just trying to get through day to day. And we don't want to go down the political rat hole, but Jesus Christ, it just is, it's so ridiculous. And it's right there. It's right. I mean, you get on a plane and you get off 2 hours later and the entire world is crumbled while you were on the plane. It's like, we're at war with who? or some obscene thing has happened, and that has not been, you'd think that would, well, it's much easier to just shut off social media and the internet and cable and whatever else because of that, because you want to escape it. But in fact, it's not. I wish it was, but it's not, because you feel like, well, wait a minute, do I just have a go bag next to my desk?
Right.
When I see the flash, then I like go to the shelter.
Yeah.
That takes a little more discipline than I have. So I don't know. And I think I acknowledge that while I don't feel like my work is easy now, and I struggle with it, it's still easier for me. I just don't have that perspective now than it is for someone starting out or someone who's earlier in their career. I mean, I basically know that when I finish a book, it's going to go into print and I'm going to get paid for it. And that's, there's some comfort in that.
All right, that does it for part 2 of the 3-part interview with Christopher Moore. So in the 3rd and final episode of this series, we'll talk about legacy. We will talk about, even romance writers, how many books they write. It's pretty fascinating. And will we ever see a Christopher Moore book on the big screen? That and more coming up in part 3. All right, talk to you guys soon.